Sometimes the way a team finishes off one season in no way, shape, or form has any bearing on what is to come the following season. On the flip side of that, you'll have those situations where a team could really pull together late in the year, go on a nice run, and even though it didn't mean anything for that particular season, it's the next year that they start to reap some of the benefits from that strong finish. It kind of builds some momentum heading into the offseason, builds some confidence within the organization. And one of those teams that was able to benefit from a strong finish last year and parlayed it into at least some success in 2016 was the Detroit Lions. You're talking about a team the first half of 2015 looked just about as bad as anybody out there. I mean, they were bad, just bad. I think they started off like 1-7, but if I recall correctly, they won like 6 of their last 8 games or so. And while that doesn't seem like much in the grand scheme of things, to go from where you were potentially banging out for the number one overall pick and look like one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the league, to be even mediocre. I mean, that's a huge level of progression there in the second half of the season. And it seemed to kind of carry over into the 2016 season for the Lions. Now, not immediately, because this was a team after that week one victory over the Colts in comeback fashion. They lost their next 3 games. So you're looking at 1-3 and you're starting to wonder, hey, what's going to happen here? Then the Lions kind of sort of started to piece it together, and they really made some hay in the middle part of the season, particular weeks 9 through 14, where once you factor in the bye, they won 5 games in a row. You're sitting there and you're looking at this Lions team, and they were a team that was sniffing down the barrel of potentially getting a first-round bye in the playoffs, getting a number 2 seed. Now, ultimately, they lost their last 3 games and kind of slid in the back door to the playoffs, mostly thanks to the fact that the Redskins decided they didn't want to show up in Week 17 with everything on the line in their season against the Giants. But at the end of the day, you got to look at this Lions team and say, for a team that a lot of people, even myself included, thought had a chance to finish last in this division, the fact that they were even in the mix to potentially win the division come Week 17 was a Herculean feat. And this wasn't a team that you looked at and thought was very, very good. Even when they were playing well, they were playing well against some less than great teams, but in general, you just looked at them and they didn't look like a playoff team. But they ultimately did get to the playoffs. And I think that is a positive reflection upon quarterback Matthew Stafford, for the knocks that we can make about him and the drawbacks that he has. This is the second time in 3 years he led the Lions to the playoffs. No playoff victories, mind you, but he's still gotten them there. And with head coach Jim Caldwell, a guy that looked like his seat was getting hot halfway through the 2015 season. He survived the wrath of Martha Ford walking around Ford Field in the Lions facilities and firing everybody's ass. And he's made something of it. And I thought he did a pretty decent job as a coach in 2016. Not perfect. I mean, at some point in time, they got to be more than just sneaking into the playoffs good, but it's something. At least the Lions were somewhat relevant again in 2016. Ultimately, though, the season did end in disappointment for them with their wild card loss to Seattle. But you could say, in theory, that this is a season that the Lions could potentially build on a little bit. I don't really know that they're much better than what they were in 2016, and I don't really see an easy way for them to get better or take another step. But there can at least be hope for that organization. You look at Matthew Stafford for a period of time, you looked at him as a potential MVP candidate because he didn't have the most talent around him on the offensive side of the ball. That offensive line was improved for sure. The wide receiving core was solid with Golden Tate and Marvin Jones and Anquan Bolden. Eric Ebron, though, was up and down, but there was absolutely no running game. This was a team that finished 30th in the league in rushing yards per game. You basically knew when you played the Detroit Lions throughout the course of the entire season that you were facing a one-dimensional offense. If you got to Stafford or you defended the receivers, the Lions were cooked. And that's pretty much what it was. So the fact that they even got into the playoffs with that very one-dimensional offense, mind you, what's most impressive about this of all is the fact that they did this all without MegaTron, without Calvin Johnson. And sometimes you see this, especially in college sports, where you have a big name player, a big star player, and the team gets to a certain point, but the year after he leaves is when you'll see that team actually take that next step and they'll become a lot better. Just funny how that works out. And it's almost like the Lions, you wouldn't think a team would be better without a potential Hall of Famer in Calvin Johnson, but they were. And it ultimately ended up bearing out that way. So for a team that you're looking at coming into this season, there wasn't a lot of reason for optimism, and they made something out of it. Even with their defense kind of being middle of the road, even with their one-dimensional offense, even without a potential Hall of Famer on the outside, even with a guy like Ezekiel Ansah having a very down year compared to 2015. I mean, this Lions team found a way to get it done, and hats off to them. But ultimately, you don't want to be a wild card team and that's it. You want to be able to contend for championships, which is something Detroit hasn't done in a very, very long time. Frankly, going back all the way to the 1950s. You can throw in the occasional aberration during the Barry Sanders years, but those were very fleeting, and I don't know if anybody ever really truly viewed them as a championship contending team. So what do the Lions do now? Heading into this offseason, they've got a little over $30 million in salary cap space. It'll be interesting to see what their philosophy is in terms of their free agents. They got two notable ones that I can think of off the top of my head: in offensive guard Larry Warford and right tackle Riley Reef. With the drafting of Taylor Decker to play on the left side, I thought it helped kind of set the pieces in motion a lot better on that offensive line, at least in pass protection for Matthew Stafford. They did a better job of protecting him in 2016. The Lions might have to pick and choose here. They may only be able to realistically afford one of them and may have to let the other one go. But if it's possible for them, they have to really consider strongly re-signing both Warford and Reef, especially Warford, although you might envision Warford being more expensive than Reef. Because when you look at the success of that team offensively, you've got to be able to keep Matthew Stafford healthy, upright, and protect him and give him time. And one of the most important things you could do for your football team is keep continuity within your offensive line. Do you really want to go into 2017 potentially having to replace one or two offensive line starters? While they don't have a ton of money in free agency, so they can't go on some big type of salary cap or salary free agent spending bonanza, sometimes the best moves you make are the ones where you retain your key players. And it will be interesting to see what they do with guys like Warford and Riley Reef. But this team's going to have to get some more talent in the NFL draft. And frankly, they could use help on both sides of the ball. I think their number one need clearly is a running back, because that dude just is not on that roster. Theo Reddick is a gadget type of guy, and he's more wide receiver than he is, frankly, running back. Zach Zenner's a nice role player, but he's not the type of guy you want to be a lead every down back at the NFL level. Amir Abdullah is not the type of dude that people thought he was going to be out of Nebraska. And you talk about a guy who missed almost all of 2016. They need a franchise back. They need a dude that can come in and be that three-down guy. They need a featured guy. A guy that can take some of the pressure off of Stafford in the passing game while at the same point in time being a weapon for Stafford in the passing game. So when you look at the Lions and where they're picking at 21st, a guy like Alvin Kamara from Tennessee, to a lesser degree, a Christian McCaffrey from Stanford, those are two guys that really seem to fit the bill for decent value based off of where you're drafting and filling huge need. This is the number one need of the Detroit Lions, because if you can get balance in your offense via a running game, it opens up more things in the passing game. And just as importantly, you get your defense off the field more, gives them more time to rest. It puts more pressure on opposing offenses to do more in less time. And that's where you can see middle of the road defenses start to play like top 5, top 10 units. They've got to be able to run the ball better, and that is by far their number one need. But I think they could also use some help at defensive end opposite Ansah. I don't really know that they have a starting caliber defensive end opposite Ansah. Maybe a guy like Hyder is somebody that you look at as a role player type, a situational pass rusher type, but they need somebody opposite Ansah. Linebacker, I felt like this has been a need on that defense for a number of years now in terms of getting some youth and speed and athleticism there, whether it's inside or whether it's on the outside. They could use some talent at the linebacking position. I think they could also use some talent at the wide receiver position. Anquan Bolden, is he going to come back even and play in 2017, let alone be effective? Marvin Jones and Golden Tate are okay, but they're not a number one type of guy. And with a Matthew Stafford, you would like to have a number one type of guy, that kind of go-to target that he really, frankly, does not have in this offense. And then also on defense, I think they could use some depth in the secondary at corner and at safety. This isn't a terrible Lions team, but the funny thing is I think they played above themselves, and they're not really a 9-7 wild card type of team. They just happened to be that in 2016. They've got to get some more pieces in place, and in particular, they've got to find a running back. They've got to find a running back because they could address some of these other holes and hit home runs in the draft. But if they don't get a running back somewhere, draft, free agency, I don't know where it comes from. I don't care. If they don't improve that position, this Lions team is going to take a step back in 2017.